Hello, my name is Philip Oseri. I'm the co-founder and director here at Eagle London Agency, and welcome to Eagle Conversations. Now, this is a podcast where we have conversations around how to empower business leaders and organizations on thriving in diverse markets, and we do this through diverse and inclusion initiatives. Now, today here at Eagle London Agency, we have a wonderful friend of ours, a friend of the agency. In fact, he's part of the agency, who's going to share his skills, his story, his life journey, and all things diversity and inclusion, as this podcast is all about. So, without wasting too much time, guys, join me. Let's welcome Mark Robinson. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Philip. Thanks for the introduction.
Good. No, I know you just flown back into the UK from a wonderful holiday. Where have you been?
I've been to Thailand. So we got around Chiang Mai, Phuket. Yeah, it was good.
I guess this is all part of opening yourself up to understand new cultures, new ways of doing things.
That's how I'll justify all my holidays.
All your
in
holidays,
future.
yeah.
Off to Spain for a week. It's about diversity. Actually, funnily enough, it is a holiday like that. And in recent years, we've done Brazil, Argentina, Sri Lanka, Vietnam. They are interesting culturally to see the changes. And for me, the last time I went to Bangkok was 45 years ago. So it's changed a bit.
Well, thanks, Mark, for joining us. As I mentioned, we have these conversations so we can explore, share ideas, offer tips to many of our business leaders out there who are really passionate about making a step in growing their business to reach a wider audience. And I think having conversations with people like yourself who've had years of experience in the marketing and the comms industry sort of help us to be able to dive deep into how the industry has changed and progressed and whatever, getting better or worse, whatever it is. You would have seen it all. So I think maybe let's just start off by you just sharing your story. I know.
Gosh.
Yeah.
It's a long story to share, Philip. So at university, I had a wonderful time, but really didn't think that much about a career. I think I was thinking about journalism and so on. And then when I left, I thought, gosh, got to get a job. So I worked in advertising sales for a little while. And as I was working for the Scotsman and other newspapers, I was going into advertising agencies. And I thought, these guys, this is great. This. I want that life. And so I wrote off to a whole bunch of agencies and, got a job. My first job was at an agency called Allardyce, which has long disappeared from lists of agencies. And I worked on, I remember two clients, Ho Seasons, which was how I got to know about boating on the Norfolk Broads. Great holidays. And the other big client of mine there was Brentford Nylons. I doubt if many of you here remember Brentford Nylons, but that was all before we'd got it. Before I worked on it, Alan Freeman had been very famously associated with it as an account. But yeah, they were my two first accounts.
So now, obviously, moving into probably the last 20 years, where you've been in consultancy, also been involved in many of the agencies that we know and hear of today. How has that journey been as well? How do you get into that?
Well, I think the nature of advertising is that you can work at one agency and move on to another. There's nothing to be lost in terms of moving around and finding things. I enjoyed being an account manager and account director on various large pieces of work. I worked across Mars, all manner of different accounts. But I then started to work on new business, and I found my niche was in marketing of agencies and new business. And that's really, once I'd settled on that, my career carried on in that vein. So I worked in a lot of agencies full time as marketing director, global marketing director, only leaving for a short while to go into the film business with a picture production company. And we started up a company called Beatwax, which was all about brand extension and the entertainment industry. For the last 15 years, I've been doing consultancy at a range of agencies, from Saatchi's, Rainey Kelly, Ogilvy's, all manner of different agencies, and going in perhaps for a year to do maternity cover for a marketing director or to maybe set up a department. That's something I've really enjoyed, setting up marketing departments, recruiting new business people and so on.
Now this is interesting because the reason why we are having this conversation, the reason why you're so key to this conversation is because of your unique passion and drive for creating inclusive environments. And I find that unique in the sense that from the era that you entered the industry, that was an era where it wasn't an inclusive era. So I really want to find out what drove you to have this interest in sort of...
Okay. Well, specifically in advertising agencies, that was surprising perhaps that advertising agencies tend to be very white, middle class and male. That was certainly the case when I joined the industry. And at first you kind of think, got to get a job, I want to be in that industry. And then as you are in it for a few years, you think we've got to make some changes here. So that happened over a period of years a bit, but it's interesting that the advertising industry is still too white and too middle class, and I think it is changing, but changing slowly. And what I've enjoyed is perhaps accelerating change in that area. Early on, when I was involved, perhaps asked to speak on a panel or something, I started to make a stand and say I wouldn't sit on all male panels. And that was my first stand. And you realise when you make a stand like that you can make change. Mm-hmm. And being able to effect change is something, once you've realised you can effect change, then go on, make more changes. And so that then I was able to bring more diversity to panels that I sat on. And indeed, I've arranged a lot of events over my time, and that increasingly I always insisted that they were diverse.
Yeah. But then I noticed also that you didn't only sort of move that agenda in the creative and advertising industry, but you sort of moved out into a very unique area, prison radio and all other stuff. Now, how did that come about?
Yeah, prison radio was probably my best idea. I think I was about 40 years old. I've been in the industry for 20 years. I had a lot of contacts. And I read in the local paper that there'd been 6 suicides at Feltham Young Offenders, which was just down the road. And so I said I could do something about this, and I talked it over at home. And I phoned up the governor, and he put me on to a guy called Steve Guy Gibbons, who was the deputy governor. And I went out, met them, and we started off with this sort of idea of doing hospital radio. But we very soon realised, let's go bigger, let's broadcast. And that's what we did. We set up a radio station. At first, it was on 999 medium wave, so I think that shows that someone at the Home Office had a sense of humour. And I was able to, at the start, tap into a lot of contacts of mine at Capital Radio, London Weekend Television as was then, and get funding, but also kit. And what was so good was just how effective it was, and how many. It was all boys at Feltham. How many of them worked on the station? So we had in any one week, we'd have about 25, 30 people working across the station. And we were able to recruit local staff and so on. And within a year or two, we actually had people working there on a paid basis. But always we insisted that the lads themselves did the broadcasting and did all the work that was involved on it. And they were guided perhaps by a couple of permanent staff.
So this was also offering skills to the inmates. Is that?
That's true. I mean, when I first went out there, guys would come along and they'd have their eyes down, they didn't look up at you, and so on. And what I noticed was you'd get them into the radio station, they'd be given, I don't know, maybe talk on the radio for a little while, and suddenly they'd change and they'd realise that actually if you look at people and you smile, and it can make a big effect. And I found the transformative effect of radio very effective at that time. Of course, the other thing about radio in prisons is they're not allowed anything else. You can't take a clock in, you can't, and you certainly, you can't, the phones are on the wall. So all of the things that we increasingly expect haven't change prison life at all. So radio is just as effective now as it was then in terms of what it delivers. But because it's now so well known, we carry all sorts of messages, what's going on locally, but also for prisoners nationally. The other great thing about prison radio is how it's become international. And it's we've set up radio stations, or helped set up radio stations, in about 13 countries.
So the other, I probably want to explore a bit more on the impact to the inmate, and also the perception that the people that you reach out to support with this, maybe the mainstream radio. So how did they take this? Because obviously, this is a very bold idea, going into prisons and trying to get prisoners to become radio producers, if that's the word, or content producers. How did the organizations that you reached out to, were they supportive, or people thought, this guy must be crazy? Where is he going with this?
I think there's this perception that people think prisons, lock them up and don't make life that pleasant. I think that's a wrong perception. I think actually the more people meet up with prisoners, the more they find them just like you and me, and actually great guys, good to work with, enthusiastic, and has been shown by various employers in this country, certainly, that they make very, very good employees. So companies like Timson's that go out, they work for them, and they're really good employees. So,
now, I'm trying to drive to a point, because I really want us to swing back to Adland. Now you've gone out there, started this new initiative in an area where really it's almost impossible to get through prisons with all the restrictions and all that stuff. But then I'm just also wondering here, when you started taking this stance in the agency world, and I'm not speaking on panels, how was it being taken within the agency? Did you really see the picture of what you were trying to bring onto the table?
I think some of the more traditional, established people sometimes got a bit annoyed with me, but that's easy to do. I think actually, though, generally speaking, people thought, yeah, right, you're right.
Yeah.
And I just don't think sometimes people are bringing these things to people's attention. And so the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And so once you start making a stand, it becomes an easier thing to do and more accepted.
So I'd also probably want our listeners, the younger listeners, business owners, to also cast their mind back on how was this one way of thinking, one set of people within that same environment trying to create content for a mass population. Obviously, I know at the time maybe the United Kingdom wasn't as diverse, but we still had women, we had people who were disabled. How much impact were these communications making in the mainstream market? Did the community feel there was a need for a diverse way of communicating to them? Did women feel, I know there were a lot of stereotypes and all that sort of thing in terms with content.
Funnily enough, I think in advertising, women, once people were making inroads there, I think women were very quickly accepted. And if you look at figures for women, it's about 51% women. But of course, what you have to look at more carefully is the roles that the women have, and that I think more and more women are in charge, but that's taken a long time for that to happen. But it's happen it must do. I think what's become more apparent is in some areas it has to happen. Disability is an interesting one, because I think none of us think enough about disability. How will people manage the stairs? How will this work? And I think disability is probably an area where we've all got to work harder at getting people involved in the industry, in the communications industry generally.
Right. So we're having a conversation now, fast forward many, many years onwards, and looking at how diverse United Kingdom has become, and where there is now more pressure on agencies, brand owners, whatever, to really be inclusive at whatever they're doing. And adding on a very interesting layer as to the benefit of this in order to speak to this diverse audience. And I think that's what us at Eagle, that's what we position ourselves for, that to reach a diverse audience means you also need to have a diverse workforce. You understand?
Yeah.
Now, would you want to share why now is the time? Is this,
Okay. Well, to use an expression, a term that I don't think is so popular these days, London 40% BAME, Now that's a large proportion of the population, and that is not reflected in so many areas. It's not reflected in the communications industry itself, and it's certainly not reflected in the product that the communications industry produces. So. It has changed. I mean, I think if you sit and watch TV last night, you'd see that ads have changed. TV ads have changed, but have they changed? I think one of the great things that Eagle does is we've worked very hard to explain and try and open up what that market is. I think too, it isn't one solid market. You know, it is so diverse itself in itself, and it's an understanding of that that's very important. It's funny because people say, "Oh yes, we've got an Indian on the, we've got an Indian Prime Minister. We've got an Indian on the board now," and it's people like our friend Sanjay, and as he says, he was born here. He went to Westminster College. He went to Oxford. That's not diversity. That's just just an Indian guy who's brought up in like the same as a white middle class guy. I think the important thing is that we get more and more people in who are actively from a community that is not the same as the white English middle class boys that usually work in ad agencies. And I think it's giving them the confidence to apply for jobs. I think that's the problem. I think all too often kids born in Newham or whatever think, "Oh, I won't go for that job. I won't get that job. I don't know anything about that job." And if we can work with them to help them understand that, yes, they could get that job, and yes, they'll be good at that job, and yes, fill in the help and maybe give a bit of help in terms of filling in CVs and so on. And I think what's happened is when a local kid has got into an ad agency or whatever, they've shown just what they can bring to the party. Real change. That's where real change is affected. And they've then been able to bring in more. The agencies themselves have said, "Yeah, look, bring in more." And so the agencies where it started actually then accelerate in terms of diversity in terms of their employees. We've seen that happening, and I think where that happens, it adds to the creativity of the agency, and it also, of course, ultimately benefits the bottom line.
But again, some agency leaders that may be watching this may think, but we've got stakeholders who are thinking that we're diluting our, they've got their market where they think they're doing so well in that market. Say, "Oh, what's our immediate market when they say about trying to diversify our product into new market?" I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think right now it's a very, very challenging time.
Yeah.
So if anyone sits there and thinks, "Oh, we'll just carry on as we are," nah, it's not going to work. So there's a sense within agencies, yes, we've got to change. There's also a sense that, yes, we've got to look at how our workforce is made up. Are we sufficiently diverse in all sectors? Obviously, women, nationality, colour, and as you mentioned, disabled, disability.
What about some agents are saying, "Well, we're afraid of getting it wrong"? Where do they tend to? You mentioned here it's a very diverse market, and you are attempting to want to speak to this diverse market. You might end up getting, and the population are also not very encouraged. If you make a mistake, they call you out. I mean,
yes. So the number of times I've heard people say, "Oh, we'd have loved for a black person to apply for this job, but no one applied," and you think that's because you were looking in the wrong place. You're advertising in the wrong place, and you've got to reassess how you recruit people, and that's fundamental to change. So yeah, I think everyone is aware that they've got to change, and it's just how. And what's been so good about Eagle is we can help people in that change, on that path to getting to an agency and to marketing departments becoming more diverse.
The other conversation that we hear, people from the ethnic market or people from the minority group say is that, yes, we get through the door, but we don't feel welcome.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I think, I think that can happen. And sometimes if you've got a nice middle-class person, they find perhaps the way people speak or just their approach is different, and difference can go, and difference is good. Yeah. And only through recruiting people from more diverse, different backgrounds will agencies ultimately succeed. But yeah, it can take a little while getting that message across, and it's difficult. We're asked, how do we recruit? And there's no easy answer. You have to work at this. Nothing's easy.
Yeah,
But then who'd be out there? For me, sometimes I think, well, goodness me, looking back, it's hard. It's a tough market out there. The margins are leaner. It's a fierce market.
So you reckon that agencies should have more of a strategy on retention than probably even recruited?
Yes, I think retention of staff is always a problem in a communications industry.
Yeah,
as we know,
and even moving up the career path. That's another point.
You sometimes have to leave and go somewhere else, but I think what's been so good for us is that we've seen how many people have flourished, having been perhaps would not have got a job in the industry, but they've worked with Eagle and they've then gone on to greater and better things. Not better things, but just different things.
And I think you're right, because for us, our purpose has been more of giving that first step. And it's difficult to have that opportunity as a young person, like you mentioned, coming off out of school in Newham or Hackney or wherever it is, wanting to have an experience of the industry and having all these barriers up. So are you then suggesting that other agencies must open up? I know there's apprenticeship and all that sort of stuff, but we want to see more agencies opening themselves up to allow these young talents to have a first step within them. And I'm sure they would also come on board with some very innovative ideas that would improve the way they do things.
I'm sure that's the case. I think apprenticeship schemes are good per se, because they are bringing people in who perhaps haven't gone the traditional educational path, maybe certainly they haven't got a degree. And I think that's why apprenticeship schemes are very good. And the more I hear of them being accepted within the industry, the better it is.
So we'll be wrapping up now, but I think before we leave, our audience, business leaders, organization, would probably want to have some 3 takeaways. If you have any tips, mainly on what are the tips for a business owner that's saying here, you know what, I've had this conversation and I really want to take a step to make a change. I believe that there's great opportunities out there for us as an organization, for the businesses that we represent. What do I do? What are some of the steps that I need to?
If only I knew those, Philip. I think that be bold. I think if you believe something can be achieved, then you can do it. Just to use a radio example, there was a little radio station that we set up in a prison for young offenders in West London. And then it became the Prison Radio Association, and now it's in every single prison in the UK, and it's in 13, and that's, who would have thought it? But if you think, it can be done, it can be done. And I think use the examples of insisting that people, that the panels are diverse, insisting that you broaden the recruitment process, all of those things. So be bold, I would say, and that's because if you think nothing comes easy, and I think that's why if you're bold about it, if you make bold decisions, it will happen. So believe not just that it can happen, but believe in yourself that you can achieve change. Everyone can achieve change, and I think that's something you've got to remember. Networking for me has always been something that I really enjoy.
Super networker, we call you.
Not everyone enjoys networking, but I've always found it was quite straightforward. So the important thing with that is that we all meet people. Increasingly, we meet people outside events, industry events, at meetings and so on. Always make sure you track those people down. Make them your best friends, because that will pay off. And to me, that's been something that I've always done. So you go to a meeting, you hook them up on LinkedIn. Years ago, you might have hooked them up on Facebook, but I don't think you'd be doing that these days. But so that to me is very important, and keep in touch with people, because those people want to be kept in touch with. You think they don't, but they do. And so networking for me has always been very important.
And then recruitment.
Okay. I use the example of people say, "Oh, if only a black person had applied." And for me, you've just got to work harder. But there are ways, and you just have to look much more broadly. We have to rethink how we recruit people, how we recruit young people into the business, and how we have to change the way we recruit, how we look at CVs, and take it from, and that's a start. And you have to keep working. You have to keep reviewing how you recruit people, and only in that way will you manage to get a diverse and talented workforce. And through a more diverse workforce, you will become more creative and ultimately earn more money.
Well, thank you very much, Mark Robinson. It's been a pleasure having you on set today here at Eagle London Agency. And thanks, guys, for joining us this evening until we catch up for the next episode where we bring you some wonderful insight. Don't forget, click on that like or subscribe button and let's stay connected so we can always be in touch with our next episodes as they come up. Thank you and stay tuned. Bye-bye.